Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres. One of the common themes we've consistently seen on the show this year is brands battle for relevance with consumers. With all the channels available, how can we send the right message at the right place in the right time? So today I'm very excited to welcome one of the most iconic companies in the out-of-home space. It's no other than Clear Channel, who you most probably will know from their outdoor advertising, like their iconic billboards. And I'm keen to understand how their approach to out-of-home can help brands reach more consumers in this race for relevance in which we find ourselves. That's why I'm very happy to welcome today, on one side, Lindsay Rapacchi, who's the Research and Insight Director, and Colin Horan, who's a strategic partner for FMCG at Clear Channel UK. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Hi Daniel, pleasure to be here. Thanks very much.
Yeah, hi Daniel, how are we doing?
Not bad, not bad. It's beginning of March here, so springtime is coming up. I was wearing a jacket too thick today, so things are good, I guess.
It's similar here, actually. It's good weather. I'm in London today, so the sun's out. It's nice. Feels like we've got through winter, maybe finally.
Well, you're in the UK. Don't celebrate too early.
Very true.
Exactly.
Very true.
We have something we call a false spring. Sometimes we get a little bit too excited, and then winter will come back in a couple of weeks.
Exactly. So, guys, thanks for coming on, and very excited about today's conversation about out of home. Can you tell me a bit about Clear Channel? I'm sure that probably something you say to people is that you're much more than billboards, and what your role particularly is there.
Yeah, I can start. So hopefully everyone knows that Clear Channel is a global business. Lindsay and I both work in the UK business predominantly. In the UK, we're one of the leading out-of-home media owners. So I guess we specialise in kind of reaching everyone in the UK. So we do that through formats at roadside, at high streets. We're also well connected in retail environments, so things like shopping malls, supermarkets. We work with Sainsbury's and Asda, a couple of our partners in the UK. In terms of my role, so as you mentioned, I'm our strategic partner for FMCG. Basically, what that means is I'm working with, I'm kind of leading on the FMCG category in the business, but I work closely with a lot of our clients in that space. So kind of working with them on getting the very best out of the channel, making sure they keep up to date with the latest developments. But I'm also kind of looking ahead to what the future holds for the category so we can start to shape our business around the needs of our clients. I should probably also add that FMCG is our biggest category, probably represents about 25% of our business from an advertiser revenue perspective. So it's hugely important. It keeps me and the rest of the commercial team incredibly busy.
Which is interesting in terms of FMCG because like there's so many like services and products, insurance, travel that you could be advertising. That the fact that FMCG is so big, it just comes to show how important marketing is in FMCG, no?
Yeah, it's obviously a huge category anyway, but I think it's got a really nice fit to kind of what we do in our business and out of home generally. So I think that's why they sort of connects the dots to make it so important, I think, for us.
Excellent. And what about you, Lindsay? I've seen some videos of you on YouTube.
Yeah, there are a few floating around. I guess as an insight director, my role, and I make no bones about it, we're all in a sales role. So ultimately, my job is, like everybody else pretty much in the business, is to flog more posters. But we try and do that with an evidence-based approach. So really, the fundamentals are to, on the one hand, support sales so that when we're answering a brief, we've got evidence-based marketing theory really to support those sales arguments. And then outside of that kind of day-to-day, we also try and tackle some of the bigger issues in marketing. So, we do work on what makes great creative in out of home, for example, or how best to try and apply out of home to a retail media strategy. Or we've recently done some work on the attention economy, for example. So, we're interested in picking apart whatever is up and coming in that space and applying our products to it.
Yeah, so it's not only like putting people on posters, but it's actually helping them show up in the right way, no? Which I think is, and we'll talk about it later, is super relevant. What about, you talk about out of home? What does that exactly mean? Because
I guess, well, what I guess out of home is you know, in the purest sense, it's reaching people when they're outside of their home, right? I guess what I think is interesting, kind of what excites me about out of home is the fact that it exists in the real world. And I think there's kind of two parts to this for me, right? So if you think about like all the work that we do or all the work that our clients do, you get to see that in the real world. And I think that's what excites me. And I think that's what excites our clients when they kind of, you know, there's something quite exciting about having the message of your ad on a massive poster in a public space that everyone can see. And I think particularly, you know, we've all become a little bit too addicted to our phones. I think we can all admit that. And I think
so, yeah.
Yeah, there's a real kind of legitimacy, I think, to seeing an ad in the real world. And I think that's what's kind of cool about out of home and what kind of remains so relevant in terms of what is a pretty traditional channel. I think the other side to that real world thing is the fact, and I always think this is an interesting thing to talk about because it's whenever I mention this, it kind of surprises a lot of people, is that we're an infrastructure business, essentially. We're a media business. We're also an infrastructure business. Out of home's the only channel that doesn't really create content. We actually build physical infrastructure. So in the UK, for example, a big part of that is building bus shelters at bus stops.
Wow.
And a lot of our ads exist at bus stops, not all of them, but that's a big part of our business. We've got around 22,000 bus shelters in the UK, and actually about 2/3 of those don't actually have any advertising on whatsoever. So we've still got a responsibility to build those bus shelters. We maintain and clean them. So we've got a huge part of our business that feels so far removed from advertising, but you know, that's part of what we do. And I think there's some research done in this space that suggests around about 50% of the revenue that gets invested into outdoor advertising from all of the big brands goes back into kind of funding the kind of public infrastructure. That's part of what it funds, whether that's through bus shelters, whether that's subsidizing like kind of public transport. The concept of out of home came from this idea of back in, I can't remember if it's the First World War or Second World War, is actually the some of the sites that were destroyed because of the bombings, actually to create advertising that kind of covered up those areas to make it look a lot nicer. So the kind of heritage is in terms of creating a kind of public use in exchange for advertising. So I think that kind of real world piece is really important, and that sort of creates, as I said, that kind of legitimacy. It kind of builds trust with advertisers as well. So I think, you know, I think that's what keeps it interesting for me.
Now that we're living in a data-driven digital world, why do you think that this channel is so relevant for FMCG brands? And clearly it is. No, if 25% of your business is FMCG, it clearly is still relevant.
Yeah, well, we have this saying, and I don't know if it's actually a quote from someone in particular or just something we've said enough times in our business, that out of home is the oldest medium, but it's also the one with the brightest future. Of course, as I mentioned, it's a channel that's been around for absolute decades, but it's one that continues to grow, and it's still in growth at the moment. I think out of home had its biggest year ever in the UK last year. I think it grew roughly about 8% year on year. And there's a couple of things that are happening. So, like, you know, firstly, the biggest reason why out of home is big for any advertiser, and particularly for FMCG, is its superpower is broadcast reach. So, out of home reaches more of the UK population than any other channel. It reaches 97% of people in the UK every 2 weeks, and that's hugely important. But then what's also happened is we've gone through this huge digital transformation. So over the last probably 5 or 10 years, there's been so much investment in the channel in terms of, you know, converting into digital screens. And so much so that we've kind of in a position now where digital out of home also is a reach channel in its own right. So I think it reaches roughly 84% of the UK population from a digital out of home perspective. what you've got then is this kind of bedrock or superpower of reach, but also then all the additional benefits that digital out-of-home brings, right? So I talk about these kind of three things: location, data, and flexibility. So location is, you've got this natural kind of real world, proximity to real world retail locations. So convenience stores, supermarkets, etc. You've now digital out-of-home can be powered by data, whether that's first-party data, whether that's third-party data, and that can kind of optimize it from a planning perspective, but also from a creative perspective. And then you've got this flexibility, which means that you can actually deliver the right message in the right time. So actually, all of these kind of enhancements makes out-of-home a lot more exciting, but it's still kind of playing on this superpower of reach. And we kind of talk about this idea, particularly in an FMCG space, is this perfect blend of both reach and retail. And I think that's really important.
And when you talk about digital out of home, does that mean screens in public spaces? Is that?
Yeah. So yeah, perhaps I should clarify that. So what we talk about as digital out of home is the difference between what was classic paper and paste to anything that's digital screen based.
It could be like a digital billboard on a bus stop, for example, as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like screens are getting much more much cheaper, basically. So, for example, you do find like in football stadiums, huge screens that you didn't find before you had like a tiny one. So I think that there's a lot of possibilities there. No?
Yeah. It's because, I mean, I think we've probably added about 400 new screens every year for around the last 5 years. So you can see that kind of development, that kind of sharp spike, and that's just from Clear Channel. So as you said, there's more digital screens popping up everywhere, and it's kind of really enhancing the landscape for digital out of home.
Yeah. And Lindsay, I know that you've done some research on that around reach, right? Which ultimately, that's, as I said, the intro is like the most what FMCG companies are basically, I don't know how to say, desperate for. That is like a top priority. Why is it so important, reach, for FMCG companies?
If you ever get a question like that, I always think with any question, it's all about what does the evidence tell me? And particularly for FMCG brands, when you look at the evidence that's out there, for me, it all leads back to reach. And specifically, that's about understanding the ultimate goal for any FMCG brand. We want to grow. We need to grow our market share. And if you look at what happens to an FMCG brand as it grows, there are 3 or 4 common things that you can expect to happen. And understanding those things should and does have a direct impact on what you do from an advertising perspective. So FMCG brands that grow, what you'll find is, first thing that'll happen is that the customer base will grow. Okay, so it will be penetration that's driving that growth and not loyalty. You're not suddenly going to see loads of people buy more and more of your product. A growing brand sees more people buy their products. And obviously, to that end, that already leads you to this idea of reach. Like, I need to reach as many people because growth is about extending my customer base. And then when you look at that growth, when you look at that customer base, what you'll also find is that predominantly the new buyers that you've attracted are like category buyers. They're probably, if you're talking about washing powder or something like that, these people are only buying maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year. And that will represent the bulk of any FMCG's audience are infrequent or non-brand buyers. And they're the ones that are going to help you grow. And they're a bit annoying in a sense, because the challenge with them is you don't know when they're going to come into market, and they're not coming into market very frequently. And when they do come into market, they're not really thinking about too many different brands. So you've got this challenge that you have to speak to these people really, really regularly and speak to all of them. And there's a lot of them. So again, you end up at this point where I need reach, and I need consistent reach to maximize my chances of influencing that important group for growth. Then the other thing you're going to find is, when that brand grows, you're going to steal share, not just from one specific brand, brands will steal share in line with other brands' market share. So if you've got a brand leader and they're like 20% market share, as you grow, you can expect that the bulk of your growth will come from that larger brand, but it will come from all of the other ones as well, relative to their size. So tactics that go after a specific brand and try and steal all of their share, the evidence says that that's not really what's going to happen. If you're successful, you're going to be successful because you're stealing brand share from everybody. And again, that means reaching all category buyers. And something very similar is true for different demographics as well. So a brand that grows sees share growing across all of its buyer base, not just niches, not just specific little audiences. So again, we want to reach everybody. And that I think is the beauty of out of home, that allows you to deliver that reach. But it's also one of the challenges. So, you asked a moment about sort of a data-driven world, and out of home is starting to move more into that space where this kind of data is available to do more targeting. But the conversation I always have with anybody is, before you start to apply that data, is to ask yourself whether or not you actually need it, and what evidence is there that says that by using this data, I will get better outcomes. And obviously, I think often what you find is like the level of targeting that you end up doing with this data is potentially not benefiting you, because what you end up doing is focusing too much on heavy category buyers that aren't the key audience for growth.
Interesting. Or, as you said, I thought that was super interesting, on a particular demographic, for example, no?
Absolutely, yeah. And so much of what we do is about, I'm going to target someone who's been onto this website in the last 48 hours and they're aged 15 to 34 and they've got a cat, 2 dogs and a girlfriend called Claire. Do you know what I mean? It's a nonsense. That doesn't have a huge impact on the way we make decisions about products, specifically not FMCG products, where, to be honest, most of us have a need for these products in some way, shape or form. And most of us spend very little time thinking about them. So, we just need to keep them front of mind in as many people as we possibly can.
That's fascinating, because it is quite counter-cultural what you're saying in a lot of different ways. About what you said about a dog and a cat and a girlfriend named Claire. A lot of people think that that's what FMCGs actually need, but it doesn't seem so. So what does this look like in reality? Like, what brands are actually doing this well? I don't know if there's any examples you can give of brands that you've seen doing campaigns and activating them well.
Yeah, I can answer this if you like. It's a question that I get asked a lot, right? And there is a lot of examples to give. There's so many brands doing this incredibly well. The answer I tend to give here is the one that springs to mind is Pepsi Max, right? So we're all familiar with Pepsi Max.
Pepsi Max is it's the low sugar version of Pepsi, right?
Yeah, well, the zero sugar version of Pepsi. And it's the predominant Pepsi brand in the UK in particular. They've been consistent users of out of home for many years, and then they use it firstly in a very consistent way, and they kind of stick to some of the building blocks that we talk about. So when I talk to clients about out of home in its simplest forms, we often talk about these kind of 3 building blocks. The first is around kind of brilliant basics, and brilliant basics is basically the reach argument that we talk about, is that they'll use out of home in a broadcast way to reach as many of their potential customers as they possibly can. So they'll build a plan with their agency that's built around the maximum possible reach and frequency they can get from their campaign. They will use a little bit of data within that to be a little bit smarter. So I know they sometimes incorporate some of their own first-party data. It's not about pinpointing specific audiences. It'll be about maybe perhaps over-indexing in certain areas where they can be a little bit smarter with that plan. But the main bulk of that is to be consistent, so they get maximum reach. And they have pretty much an always-on presence, so almost like a maintenance strategy to make sure they've got sort of consistent share of voice across the year. And then the second kind of pillar in that, or the building block, is what I like to call the power of digital out of home. So once you've got that kind of base plan, is how do you use some of the elements that I mentioned before, that kind of that digital out of home brings. And I think what Pepsi do incredibly well here is think about that flexibility piece. So how do they then tailor that message to make sure that they're delivering the right message in the right time? So perhaps like slight iterations of their creative, depending on the time of day, the day of the week. An example could be, they're big partners of the UEFA Champions League, so they'll activate certain messages on game days or aligning with the Champions League final. So they're going to be a little bit smarter, but they still kind of got that level of consistency in that as well. They might use some data, their real-time data, to sort of power that creative as well. And then the kind of icing on the cake is to deliver that kind of like super fame, like iconicity of the brand as well. So they might buy some of the kind of super premium iconic formats. They might add a little bit of kind of innovation or kind of special builds or creativity in the mix as well. But it's kind of all rooted in those kind of brilliant basics of delivering that reach, not focusing on the kind of the fame driving stuff first. It's kind of rooted in that base plan and all the theory that Lindsay just spoke about.
And what you talk about, and I think that's super interesting, the iconicity of the brand, and you talk about super premium iconic formats and out of home. What does that look like?
I guess, I mean, we have some, one of our flagship sites, for example, is called the Cromnation. It's a bit of a play on words. It's situated on the Cromwell Road in West London, the kind of route in from Heathrow into the city. And that, for example, I think is the longest digital billboard in Europe. Wow. Don't quote me on that in case that's changed, but that's something we often talk about. And that site alone, I think, delivers about 11 million impacts, or can reach 11 million people over a fortnightly basis. So just that one site alone. And actually that idea that if you're a brand that's positioned in one of these billboards, then there's a bit of a kind of signal in theory that you're an iconic brand. The fact that you exist and that you're able to afford this billboard, and kind of consumers know that. But we've also seen a kind of an uptick in people doing what we call special builds. So actually kind of bespoke builds on top of billboards, whether it's kind of 2D or 3D builds, that again create a little bit more impact in the real world when people see those themselves. And I guess in turn, by doing some of this stuff, the ability to drive incremental reach online as well. So, if a consumer will see something interesting that kind of excites them in the real world, then they're more likely to take a photo of it, share it online, share it with their friends, so on and so forth. So we've seen a bit of a trend in that space because of that kind of link between the kind of real world and the virtual world.
And I guess that it's all about, when we talk about best practices, it's all about, as you were saying, like consistency as well. So all about like not just putting an ad on a billboard or on a billboard and something else, but actually closing the loop with that digital presence as well. No, I guess that's what you see the best marketers and FMCG do in general, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think any good marketer will not just be thinking about their out of home plan. They'll be thinking how it links back to their social strategy or their TV plan and everything, making sure there's some consistency, but using the channel in the right way to get the most out of it, essentially.
Yeah. And it's interesting, no, because you talk about like this real like aspirational type of ad. And Lindsay was talking about, I was saying it explicitly, but what I interpret as like maybe an over-reliance on data. And I think that this is where the general narrative is going now, that brands really have to reinvest back into brand building, storytelling, and so on. So how do you think out of home can be like one of like the key anchors for FMCG brands to be able to be, again, like very relevant to a lot of audiences and really like have a brand that says something to people, no? That's not only like another brand in the supermarket, but something more aspirational.
I think for me, that one's quite an interesting one. And it's an area we've done some work on quite recently, is that without question, branding and getting back to branding and not overly relying on data is hugely important. But I wouldn't personally position out of home as a storytelling medium. I think that if you're going to build a brand, we often talk about building mental availability and aligning your brand to category entry points. So ensuring that your brand comes to mind immediately when buyers have a cue to enter that category. And I think things like TV and cinema do a wonderful job of building these brand memories and developing those stories. And I always recommend, if anyone's got the budget, you should stick some money towards those channels to try and build those stories. Out of home for me is the equivalent of someone stood at the side of the road shouting at you. That is basically what it is. And they're only shouting at you for a second or so. Now, that doesn't mean that it's an ineffective or a poor choice, but what it allows you to do is it means that the stories that you've built elsewhere and that strong branding, nobody can afford to constantly take 30 seconds of people's time on a TV ad and build these stories constantly. So you need another media channel that allows you to take those memories that you've built in consumers' mind and just reignite them. Just to refresh those memories. And for me, that's what out of home does. And you shouldn't force it to do any more than that. And that is literally sticking up a poster that just says, don't forget me, I'm here. Kellogg's have done some brilliant work recently like that. I don't know, certainly it's been all over in the UK, but TV, lead medium, they've got this wonderful, if you know the distinctive brand asset for Kellogg's, which is that cockerel. They've got this asset walking through the middle of crowded streets. And it's like
I have seen it. Yeah.
Amazing, right? Not really something that you could do on any other channel to really bring that to life. But they're really heavyweight on TV. They're building those brand memories in people. And then they're doing some brilliant out-of-home executions that aren't trying to do too much. All they do is show that cockerel, along with Kellogg's, reignites all those brand memories. And they're not trying to force the envelope. They're not trying to do any more than that. And I've no doubt that they will see huge successes as a result of that.
Yeah, it's true that a lot of some brands, when they've done a rebranding exercise, it's been a good way to remind people when you see that new logo everywhere, and it creates like a certain hype around it.
Ultimately, again, that's all you're trying to do is just refresh those memory networks in people's mind. And Out of Home is a great channel for doing that, but don't force it. Don't try and do more than that.
Yeah. I think, as Lindsay mentioned, that the kind of simplicity is key in this. But I think you can be playful within that as well. So, just an example from yesterday. So Tesco, the biggest supermarket in the UK. Ran an ad for Pancake Day. For anyone maybe that's not in the UK that doesn't know what Pancake Day is, it's the day, hopefully I'll get this right, it's the day before Lent starts in the build up to Easter. So traditionally it's when everyone eats all the kind of the leftover eggs and sugar and all of that stuff before they partake in Lent. And in the UK, it's become famous for everyone eats pancakes, Pancake Day. So it's a famous day on a Tuesday. And Tesco just ran this ad that just had the simple ingredients of pancakes. So flour, eggs, milk. Are we going to get this wrong?
Sugar, maybe
sugar. And then and because everyone flips their pancakes, they just turn the ad upside down and displayed it on Out of Home upside down. So a really simple, clever way to sort of drive a bit of emotion, but within that kind of couple of second window that you would, as Lindsay put it, a man shouting at you on the street. But potentially stood upside down while he's doing it. So,
yeah. And by the way, we haven't mentioned retail media yet. And actually, Colin, you and me actually met at the Retail Media Summit. Yeah. So I'm sure that you have some opinion on it. Well, first of all, I wanted to ask you, from an outsider industry person perspective, how have you seen the rise of retail media, and why do you think it makes sense? First of all.
I'll maybe let Lindsay take this. I know you've heard me talk about this a lot, but I think Out of Home has a huge role to play in the future retail media. But I think I'll let Lindsay explain, because he's got some passionate thoughts on this himself.
So I suppose I'm not a huge advocate of the idea, or not the idea, but so much the concepts of retail media. So the truth is that retail media, to my mind, based on what I know, was born thanks to Amazon, right? We had to pay huge amounts of digital rent to Amazon. And in order to do that, marketeers had to go and ask for more money, essentially. And it's easier to ask for more money when you put it into a new bucket and you label that bucket retail media. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's still about 60% of all retail media spend ends up in the pockets of Amazon. So, but it's going to grow, and other people are cottoning on to this. We're essentially understanding that there is a new pot of money that we can access to essentially rent prominence at the point of sale. And that's definitely something that's worth doing. However, the idea is that you're renting prominence at the point of sale, and the money that you spend, to my mind, should be reflective of where the money is being spent. So I saw some stats for the US the other day, and I think 14% of all media money was going to be spent on retail media, and that's something ridiculous like £54 billion. Yet the proportion of that money that was dedicated to driving or renting prominence online was about 99% of all of that money, and only 1% was renting prominence in store. Now, what you can guarantee is that the way the American economy does not work, that 90% of all retail money or 99% is being spent online. So there's a huge overinvestment in that channel in a digital world. So I think that needs to be readdressed. And obviously out of home is one of the channels that is definitely capable of readdressing that. You know, you've got a load of different poster sites that exist moments away from points where people are actually buying, and it allows you to rent prominence at those locations. And that's brilliant, and we're definitely moving into that area. The thing that I think is really, really critical to be aware of is that it is not the same channel. So a lot of people will try and sell you a bit of snake oil, to be honest. They'll try and tell you that, well, look, retail media, that's essentially a digital screen. I go onto Sainsbury's website or some supermarket, I type in washing powder and up pops an ad. That's a digital screen. You guys have got digital screens and they're outside a shop as well. And that's fine. The principle is essentially the same. You're trying to reach someone who's about to buy a product and nudge them. But the model is very, very different. And if you look at the results of those two channels and try and compare them, you will very, very quickly dismiss out of home as a channel that's not worth doing. And the reason for that is because the digital retail media network is a hugely efficient channel. It knows that you are in the market for washing powder because you've just typed it in. Whereas the screen outside a supermarket, a very small proportion of those people, because we spoke about light infrequent buyers earlier on, a very small proportion of those people are going to be in the market for washing powder that day. But because of the way my model works, I show your ad to everybody that goes into that supermarket, and I have to charge you for everybody because that's the way my model works. So when you compare them on something like a short-term ROI in an econometric model, you will rightly see that a digital online retail media network is hugely more efficient than an out-of-home network. But that doesn't mean that the out-of-home network isn't doing a great job. What that's doing is it's reaching all of those category buyers that might not be in market that day, but it's building mental availability in those customers. It's refreshing memory networks so that when they ultimately do come into market, it's that brand that comes to mind in a buying situation. So, really, really important to use it because that's where the bulk of your money, particularly in the world of FMCG, is probably being spent. But use it knowing that it's not the same thing.
Yeah, so it's more like a thing of expectation and theoretical conception of it. No, really?
Absolutely, yeah. Which sounds, as I put it there, sounds, very obvious and sensible. But you would be amazed at how many people, partly because they've been sold into the idea that it's the same thing, when really, practically, it's not.
Yeah, makes total sense. What are the biggest opportunities in out of home? I mean, there's obviously, you said it, how did you put it? The most traditional, but the oldest but brightest future, right? So, what are the biggest opportunities in out of home right now, Colin?
I think, we probably spoke about the biggest opportunities in, reach is hugely important. I think it's understanding how to use it in the right way. If you're thinking about retail media perspective and getting the creative right and all those things. So maybe I'll talk about one of the latest opportunities. So what's happened now is you're seeing the kind of rise of programmatic digital out of home. Essentially, that's basically opening things up for it to become much easier for brands to access out of home, much easier to buy and have complete control over their campaigns. it's probably worth pointing out that's not going to replace the traditional way of buying out of home, and we wouldn't recommend that, because actually, as I mentioned with the Pepsi Max example before, is understanding how to maximize your reach and your frequency and all of those things, and reaching all those light bars is super important. But having that layer of programmatic can give you additional control, can help you plug into perhaps what you're buying from a digital perspective, and getting a more kind of omni-channel campaign using real-time data, etc. Example maybe kind of recently we saw Heinz Soup in the UK activate around the weather. So Heinz Soup want to kind of build that association. So back to Lindsay's point around kind of aligning with those category entry points, you want to build that association with the fact that when it's cold outside, and it's definitely cold in January in the UK, is that's when you want to think about a hot soup. So actually, how can you use that real-time weather data to then say, when it is cold outside and when it's really cold, we'll dial up our activity and we'll increase our presence in those moments. So that's kind of how brands are kind of tapping into that use of programmatic, and I think that'll just sort of continue to rise over the next few years. That's what we expect to see anyway.
And from your perspective, Lindsay, what other opportunities do you see?
Do you know, I think the opportunities is a really simple one, and it's just to use it. Because what we find, certainly in the UK, and I know that for 90% of markets, it's not too dissimilar, is out of home is a 4 or 5% medium. So we see relatively small amounts of budget comparative to other channels moving into this medium. And the odd thing is that, there's loads of evidence that tells you about the strength of this. And based on that evidence, I would suggest that there is a degree of investment that should be increased. And there's lots of information that we see from things like, if you're familiar with the idea of extra share of voice, and it's a bit more complex than this. But a simple rule of thumb that arguably you should be spending more on media as a proportion of total advertising within your category than your market share. And essentially what you're trying to do is tell people that you are as big, if not bigger, than you really are. And that is often a very simple rule, but when you break it down, I think it's more important to understand about the presence in people's lives of different media channels. And out of home, I think, affords you the opportunity to buy extra share of voice at a relatively cheap price, because it's something that is ubiquitous. We all step out of our door and it's always there. Unlike things like TV, where we kind of pick and choose our moments to engage with that. So there's a real opportunity to drive extra share of voice and just speak louder than everybody else in your category, and just increase the likelihood of your brand coming to mind at those points in time. And I think that that's going to be short-lived, or at least I hope it is, in a sense. There are brands that are doing it now, and they're doing it brilliantly, and they're spending maybe 20-30% of their budgets, and when you step out your door in the UK, they dominate that space. Okay, and that's brilliant, but that's going to be short-lived. When everyone else cottons onto that, it's going to become a more cluttered market. So make hay while the sun shines, invest a bit more money would be mine.
Yeah, I think that at the end result will be what matters most. So if we see consistently that brands are able to execute out of home very well, are the ones that are winning in their category, I think it will tilt in that direction. And from what we've seen in terms of the trends, I think that we're going towards there. When you talk to, if actually a CMO, which a lot of CMOs listen to this show, of FMCG, what would be like your number one recommendation for them in 2025 from your perspective?
I always think, what advice can I give to a CMO at an FMCG company? But I'm sure they're a lot more experienced than I am. But I guess the thing I'd say is, to Lindsay's point before about it's easy to buy the excess share of voice. You can spend a lot of money in outdoor if you've got the budget. That's the easy thing to do. I guess the bugbear I have is when someone spends a lot of money or spends any money, and then the creative execution is poor, because it's just not going to work for you. And I'd say too often we see sort of poor creative in outdoor that's maybe not built with outdoor in mind. So, it's got a lifestyle shot on there, it's got the product shot in there, someone's put a QR code in, they've got a hashtag, they've got 3 strap lines. It's all going on because, so many people have had their say on what they should and shouldn't include in the poster. But actually, as we've talked about already, the way in which out of home is consumed, you might be driving past a poster at 40 miles an hour on the side of a road. It's high impact, but it's short dwell time. You've got to deliver that message in a simple way. So I think the one thing is to make sure that the buying of the out of home and the creative are working as effectively as possible. It's actually a piece of work. Well, we've done a lot of work in this space over the last few years. I think a few years ago, we didn't think that we had much of a say on creative because, we own the space. We're not a creative agency. Yeah. But actually, what you soon realize is that you're the out of home expert, and actually understanding the kind of nuances of the way people consume the channel is kind of really important. So actually, we can give some of our guidance. We've done a lot of research in this space as well. We've got kind of a content series we call Powerful Posters. We do loads of workshops with clients all the time, just educating them how to get the most out of the creative. So that's the biggest thing for me is making sure that people are making the most out of it in a creative way.
When you think of like all the experience that you've had with creative and posters and so on, is there any like anecdote that you could share that would surprise me in terms of like, you would never expect that type of creative would be very relevant in a certain moment? Or
well, it's funny you say that. I don't know if this is the best example, but on the train this morning, I saw on LinkedIn someone posted a picture of an ad that I think is running at the moment, and it said, the headline of their LinkedIn post said, "Out of home is becoming disproportionately powerful," which I thought was a kind of an interesting way to put it. But the ad was for a stock cube, right? So Knorr, I don't know if you have Knorr in all the markets of Unilever brands. So it's a stock cube. It's not a very sexy brand, right? But actually, the poster was just a picture of a badly delivered burger. So if you had like Deliveroo or Uber Eats deliver your burger and it's all kind of all over the place in a big mess, and it just said you can deliver better, in this idea of like you should be doing more home cooking, and it's kind of aligning to that. So I think just that kind of, doesn't matter what brand you are, I think you can be bold, you can be really brave, play to that simplicity, and that can be, creative can be super simple but still be kind of aligning to your brand really in a really simple way.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you have like that sort of vision and where you want to go, where you stand also as a brand, you don't need to overcomplicate, I think. What about you, Lindsay? What is your one piece of advice you would give to, or recommendation to FMCG brands?
I'm probably going to stretch this slightly and cheekily sort of combine two into one. And my advice would be to follow the money and follow the evidence. And they would be the two key things. So when we talk about following the money, look at where the money is being spent. For most markets in the UK, 90% of FMCG money is spent in store. So your media plans should reflect where people are spending their money. If you pile endless amounts of money into digital, there is a strong chance that you're over-investing in one type of buyer. And then similarly, follow the evidence. And in that vein, what the evidence will tell you is if you're plowing a load of money into renting prominence, be that on digital channels or online, to nudge those final sales, the ability for you to do that will be directly countered by how much effort you put into branding. Okay, last click attribution, lots and lots of issues with that, about what it's actually attributing, the fact that it's missing out all the other stuff. But what we know is the stronger your brand, the easier it is, the more efficient you are at nudging people over their edge at the final point of purchase, which is most likely to be in store.
Yeah, because it's as what we were saying before, if you've done like a great like campaign and positioned your logo well, then you don't need that much to remind them about it, no?
So yeah, exactly. So, I'm not a golfer, but it's a bit like the golfing, all the hard work is done getting to the pin, right? The better you get, the closer you get to that pin, the easier the putt is. And it's as simple as that. Do you know what I mean? You do all the hard work first, and then you can let your digital channels and your point of renting prominence at the point of sale just knock it in.
Well, I'm sitting in front of a big amount of notes and takeaways from this conversation, which I've learned a lot from. So I'm going to try to do a bit of a recap, and it's going to be impossible to go through all of it, but I'm going to try. So, out of home media super interesting medium. And I think that Clear Channel is clearly one of the leaders with 33,000 paper and physical roadsides, high streets, shopping malls, supermarkets, can find them everywhere. And on top of it, 25% of your business is in FMCG, which is what we're very passionate about on this podcast. I also thought it was very interesting the fact that you not only in the advertising space necessarily, but also actually part of like bus shelters, for example, that don't necessarily have commercials. But going to the commercial side, we talked about out of home. Now I see the quote written here. The oldest medium bit with the brightest future. It reaches 97% of the UK population every 2 weeks. So that's quite a lot when we talk about reach. But still, it's traditional, but still there's a digital transformation element to it. And digital out of home has become a challenge in its own right. When we talk about FMCG brands, we talked about the importance of reach. And the ultimate goal is market share. And there's some key things that we need to understand when we talk about market share, which is that FMCGs grow basically through extending their customer base. And what I thought was very interesting, Lindsay, and you were talking about that, and I told you how interesting it was that when a brand grows, it steals not from only the leader, but also the other competitors, and that it grows throughout different demographics and social niches, if you like. It grows through all of them. So to attack one very specific niche doesn't really make much sense if you want your brand to grow long term. We talked about the Pepsi Max example, and it's one to, I think, go back and listen to again. We talked about how to be consistent and out of home through brilliant basics, the power of digital out of home, and the iconicity of the brand. Because that's very important, because as we talked about, out of home is not necessarily a storytelling channel, but it's more something that reinforces the brand story that you've built. And as Lindsay put it, it's somebody shouting to you from the other side of the road about that brand. And I think we talked about a couple of examples as well, like the Kellogg's example that had a lot of visibility recently. We talked about also out of home as opposed to retail media, and especially when we talk about in-store retail media, and clarifying some basic concepts that probably the way to see it as out of home makes more sense than as a retail media channel. Talked about opportunities for out of home this year. Super interesting about programmatic and digital out of home, because I think it kind of removes the static element that somebody may see in out of home, and really, like we talked about Heinz appearing when the weather's not good, because that's when people want to be at home and eat their beans, for example. And we talked about also the fact that probably people should spend more on it, and that should probably be quite a big opportunity this year for out of home. And it will become in some way a more competitive channel, which I guess is good. And finally, some advice for FMCGs, which I thought was very valuable. On one hand, when somebody spends money and the creative execution is poor, it's not a good idea. So really think about like the creative aspect. And I think that's something that marketers have to work more on, not just in getting the campaign out, but actually to getting a good campaign out. And we talked about bold and brave posters. I think that's a good bottom line. And ultimately about following the money and following the evidence. So I hope I summed up this decently.
Well, the one thing I've learned, Daniel, is that you're an incredibly good note taker. That was impressive.
It must be my background in recruitment, where you have to take all the notes and remember all these things about people. So this was amazing, guys. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to learn more about the out of home?
I mean, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I love a good chat about out of home or a debate. I think for us, we're always up for helping brands and clients get the most out of the channel. So whether that's a direct conversation, a meeting, or, I hope Lindsay doesn't mind me saying, but there's a lot of videos, whether on YouTube or on our website, of Lindsay talking about a lot of the evidence. So he's only sort of scratched the surface on some of the stuff we've talked about today. So I don't know if you got anything to add, Lindsay.
No, same for me. Like loads of great stuff on LinkedIn, a lot of articles that we've written over the years, and if you can bear to sit through more of me. There are, as Colin said, a number of videos knocking around as well.
Well, I wanted to hear more after this conversation, Lindsay. So I'll be doing that, and I'll be obviously leaving your LinkedIn profiles in the show notes and also some key links. So thanks, guys. It was great to learn about out of home with you guys. And thanks to our audience for tuning in again to the show. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG, guys. Have a great day.